In 1999, Robert Downey Jr. was sitting in a California state prison. 8 years later, he signed on to Iron Man for a base salary of $500,000. Marvel thought they had capped their risk on a dangerous hire and walked away thinking they had won. By the time Iron Man left theaters, that $500K base had paid Robert Downey Jr. over $50 million, over 100 times his base salary on a single film, all because of one specific contract clause that Marvel never imagined they would actually have to pay out. This isn't just an actor's redemption story, it's a financial playbook, and once you see the structure, you'll recognize it everywhere. Flying too close to the sun. By 1992, Robert Downey Jr. was on track to be the defining actor of his generation. He was 27 years old, freshly Oscar nominated for Chaplin, and the British Academy had just given him their highest actor rating honor. The trajectory was clear, and everyone in Hollywood could see it. But then, he threw it all away. In 1996, Robert was arrested on Sunset Boulevard in possession of a whole lot of stuff. Then, in 1997, he missed a court-ordered drug test, which resulted in sending him for 4 months to an LA County jail. And then in 1999, he missed another one. The judge had seen enough and sentenced him to 3 years in California State Prison, of which he served 15 months. And when RDJ got out, Hollywood had moved on. By 2001, he was fired mid-season from Ally McBeal, one of the most watched shows on television at the time. But the firing wasn't just about substance abuse, it was about insurance. In the film industry, every major production carries insurance that protects the studio if a cast member can't finish the film. It's not optional. No insurance, no green light. And because of his substance problem, by 2001, no insurance company on Earth would cover Robert Downey Jr. at any price. He had become too much of a risk. No insurance meant no new acting roles. No roles meant no income, and no income meant no real path to recovery. The trap fed itself. Robert Downey Jr. went from being an Oscar-nominated actor to somebody nobody would return calls for in under a decade. But every now and then, one person looks at someone the rest of the world has written off and gives them a shot. And then in 2003, that person showed up. Phase 2, the comeback role. Susan Levin was a film producer for Warner Brothers. She first met Robert Downey Jr. on the set of Gothica in 2003. And then somewhere in between the first day of shooting and the last, something happened that no Hollywood contract could have predicted. She fell for him. Not the movie star, not the comeback story, him. But she loved him with conditions. She told Robert very clearly, it's the substances or her. Pick one. Every rehab program, every judge, every intervention had failed to stick. But that ultimatum did. The story goes that Downey had a moment of clarity about their relationship outside of a Burger King and threw what remained of his stash into the ocean. And because Robert held true to that large commitment and finally had real skin in the game, she made one too. Susan told the studio that she would quit if they fired Robert. Her career, her reputation, her credibility, all of it on the line. Both of them had to bet everything on the same outcome. 2 years later, in 2005, Robert and Susan were married. And what Susan Levin actually gave him wasn't just love. It was the one thing the show business couldn't provide. A reason to show up and stay clean that had nothing to do with money. Around the same time, Mel Gibson, who was one of the largest stars in all of Hollywood, also gave Robert a shot. Mel Gibson and Downey had worked together in 1990 on the film Air America. The movie had flopped, but the friendship didn't. Over the next decade, as Downey's life unraveled publicly, and when Downey finally got sober in 2003 and still couldn't land work, Gibson had cast him as the lead in the film The Singing Detective, a role originally written for Gibson himself. Gibson also personally paid Downey's insurance bond so the production could move forward without any budgeting issues. Two people, one put her career on the line, the other put his money on the line. Both believed in an actor that the rest of Hollywood had stopped looking for. Most actors in this situation would take a big swing immediately, force the comeback, land the blockbuster, prove to everyone that wrote them off that they were wrong. But Downey did the exact opposite. Instead of chasing the big blockbuster role, Robert booked a role for Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, a tiny, low-budget thriller that nobody had their eyes on. And that was the whole point. Low stakes meant low scrutiny. It gave Downey a chance to do the one thing that a rehab program or court order couldn't do for him. Prove on a real set, in a real production, that he could show up every every single day, hit his marks, and finish a film, all while remaining clean. Then Zodiac, then A Scanner Darkly, each project served as one small verifiable data point that Downey's risk profile was changing, and slowly the rest of the film industry started to take notice. In fact, one key Hollywood director in particular had been watching Robert's comeback story very closely. Phase 3, the $20 million bet. That director was Jon Favreau, and Favreau had a problem. He was trying to cast Tony Stark, a brilliant, arrogant, self-destructive guy who somehow makes you root for him anyways. Favreau had looked at all the safe options, Tom Cruise, Nicolas Cage, Sam Rockwell, but none of them had it. So he went back to his research pile, and near the bottom of it was Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. He watched it, and there it was. Downey wasn't playing a character like Tony Stark. He basically was Tony Stark. The wit, the chaos, the redemption, it was all already written in the man's actual life. You couldn't cast someone to play that. You had to find someone who had already lived through it. So Favreau went to Marvel with one name, Robert Downey Jr. Marvel pushed back hard because, you see, this wasn't just a casting decision. The studio was nearing bankruptcy and had just mortgaged its own characters to Merrill Lynch to finance the film. They were a company that had bet everything on a single production, which meant they needed the one thing Robert Downey Jr. had spent the last decade destroying: reliability. But Favreau held his ground against the studio. He knew what Downey was capable of, and eventually Marvel folded, but with one condition: Downey's base salary being only $500,000. This might sound like a lot of money still, but for context, A-list actors at the time were commanding $15 to $20 million per film on a similar project. Downey accepted less than what a mid-tier TV actor would in a single season of television. At face value, this might look like desperation, but Downey had one more move. He didn't just take the low salary, he negotiated a cut of the film's profits, specifically 8% gross profit. Now, that distinction matters, so here's how it actually works. Net profit is the number Hollywood uses after the accountants are done subtracting all of the costs to actually make the film. Fees get stacked, invoices get paid out, and somehow a film that makes $500 million on paper barely breaks even, and only has to pay out minimal back-end profits. That being said, gross profit is a different story entirely. That's the raw number, every dollar the film makes coming in the door before anyone else touches it. Harder to hide and harder to make disappear. So Downey walked in with a $500,000 salary and 8% of gross for the first Iron Man movie. Marvel walked in thinking they'd capped their risk on a dangerous hire. Both sides shook hands believing they each had won. Then Iron Man opened on May 2nd, 2008, $585 million worldwide on only a $140 million budget. It didn't just do well at the box office, it became the box office. And when that 8% gross kicked in, Downey's total take on the single film came out to somewhere north of $50 million, more than anyone was making in Hollywood. He made 100 times his base salary on the back end of the project. But Iron Man didn't just make Downey rich, it made him something far more valuable than wealthy. It made him irreplaceable for Marvel, the cornerstone of the franchise. And irreplaceable assets don't negotiate, they dictate, which is exactly what happened next. Now, if you want to see how other operators use this exact same system to build 9-figure empires, hit subscribe. On this channel, we stop looking at celebrities as entertainment and start analyzing the money systems behind them. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Phase 4, the Tony Stark Empire. Iron Man didn't only change Downey's bank account overnight, it also changed his negotiating position with the movie studios at a structural level. Iron Man wasn't just a hit one-off movie. It had become the foundation of something much bigger. Marvel was now building a cinematic universe. Thor, Captain America, every character converging into a single large interconnected movie franchise. And at the center of it was one face, one character, Tony Stark. So when Marvel and Disney came back to the negotiating table for Iron Man 2, Downey wasn't just an actor looking for his next role. He had become the product. No film studio in the entire world could recast the main character the entire franchise was actively being built around. Robert knew this and used it to his advantage. So he renegotiated his terms for Iron Man 2. $10 million guaranteed, 20 times his Iron Man base plus back end. Marvel paid it because the alternative was unthinkable. Then in 2012, for his appearance in the Avengers, is where the math gets genuinely hard to believe. Downey's reported total compensation came in around $50 million. The film grossed $1.5 billion worldwide. He'd also negotiated performance bonuses, which meant the bigger the film got, the bigger his check grew automatically. Downey had essentially built a revenue share into his own employment contract with Marvel. Robert didn't just benefit from MCU's success, he was contractually positioned to capture a percentage of it, and that's the whole key here. Then in 2019, after 11 years and 22 Marvel films, Avengers Endgame was released in theaters. It was the movie finale Marvel had spent over a decade and billions of dollars building towards. Downey's estimated payday, $75 million. The highest single film actor compensation ever recorded at that point, from $500,000 to $75 million. Same franchise, same character, completely different leverage position. After Endgame, the MCU chapter was coming to an end. Tony Stark was gone, and with him, the contract that had made Downey the highest paid actor on Earth. Most people assumed Robert Downey Jr.'s peak was behind him. They were wrong. Phase 5, the Great Reset. When Tony Stark died in Endgame, so did Downey's contract. The back end, the gross participation, all of it came to a halt. And Downey was 54 years old. In Hollywood, that's not a pivot point. That's where the story ends. You take the legacy roles, the cameos, the nostalgia tour, you coast and call it a well-lived career. But the market had just relabeled him. Downey was no longer the MCU engine. He was a legacy asset. Respected, celebrated, but was quietly written off for anything that mattered commercially, which meant he was underpriced again. Robert had been here before, and he knew exactly what to do. Not a blockbuster, not a franchise, a small, carefully chosen bet that let him prove something the market had stopped believing. So he called Christopher Nolan, who at the time was casting for his 3-hour historical drama about theoretical physics and moral consequence. No franchise, no guaranteed audience, and the role wasn't even the lead. Lewis Strauss, a bureaucratic villain in a film carried by Cillian Murphy. Robert's fee? Pennies of what Tony Stark had been paying him. But that was exactly the point. The Oppenheimer grossed $952 million. Downey won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, his first Oscar, at 58. But here's what nobody noticed. While Hollywood spent years debating whether RDJ still had it, he was already building something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with acting at all, and he'd been doing in plain sight. Phase 6, the secret portfolio. While Tony Stark was still printing him mountains of cash, Downey was quietly solving a problem most people never think about until it's too late. Here's the thing about being the highest paid actor on Earth. The money is massive, but it doesn't last forever. When the character dies, the checks stop. And the gap between highest paid actor in Hollywood and what happened to that guy is shorter than most people might think. Jim Carrey, Eddie Murphy, the list of actors who hit a peak and didn't build anything underneath is long. What made Downey different wasn't that he earned more, it was that he understood what he was earning. His acting career wasn't a salary, it was a volatile income stream. Once you see it that way, the next move becomes obvious. When your main income is unpredictable and can vanish overnight, everything around it sort of has to be the opposite. So he built his money in 2 layers. Layer 1, growth. In 2019, the same year he cleared roughly $75 million from Endgame, he launched Footprint Coalition, a venture fund betting on clean technology. The bets were serious. Biodegradable plastic, fusion energy. Downey put in a reported $100 million, roughly a third of his net worth at the time, before clean tech became the obvious trade everybody was talking about. That's not a passion project, it's early positioning. But here's what made Footprint different from just writing checks. Downey brought something to these companies that money alone can't buy. His ability to take a complicated technical subject matter and explain it to millions of ordinary people. When Footprint invested in biodegradable plastics company, Robert's team made a video breaking it down in plain English. Millions of views, and for a deep tech startup, that kind of reach is worth more than the investment itself. Layer 2, preservation. Starting in 2009, right after Iron Man, he quietly bought coastal California real estate, a Malibu compound, a rustic canyon property, a Pacific Palisades ranch. Steady acquisitions spread over a decade, totaling somewhere between $40 and $50 million today. Why coastal California? Well, the supply is legally legally locked. Coastal building permits are nearly impossible to get, so you can't just build more Malibu Beach properties. In between 2009 and 2019, that market appreciated 60 to 80%. Now, look at the full picture. Downey's net worth today is an estimated $300 million, maybe a lot more. Venture fund on one end, real estate on the other, MCU backend funded both. No single source dominates, no single failure unwinds it. Maximum risk on one side, maximum stability on the other, nothing stuck in the middle. When your income is unpredictable, your money model can't be. That is not just being rich, that is wealth architecture. The system is this: find the moment the market undervalues you, get in at a low price, and structure the deal so the upside is uncapped. Robert Downey Jr. ran that same playbook for 30 years to print hundreds of millions of dollars. Talent got Robert Downey Jr. in the room, structure is what built the empire. Now, if you want to see how Ryan Reynolds ran this exact same playbook on a failing football club and cell phone company, the breakdown is right here. Different industries, same founder instinct. I'm Buster. I'll see you next time.